Sonya started selling Judaica in her 350 square foot glass gallery studio in 1999 after attending a conference where she met her first Israeli mentor, Dr. Danny Ben Gigi, which later grew into Bat Zion Hebrew Learning Center in 2004 to 2010. Sonya's love of glass was a big part of her transition and her journey back to Judaism. Sonya's discoveries have seemed to link her to both her Jewish and glass history. Sonya has traveled to Israel to organize Anusim conferences, tours, and advocate for B'nai Anusim and their acceptance back into the Jewish community. She has worked with many rabbis who are currently working with Anusim communities to facilitate the Anusim return fully to Judaism. She has lectured for Rhodes Scholars for the Meet a Converso program in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and her story has been featured in the Fractured Faith Museum exhibit at the Santa Fe Historic Museum, along with several newspaper articles, magazines, Jewish television, radio programs, documentaries, academic conferences, books, NPR, and fundraisers. And we're also joined by Daniel, who will be the first speaker. Daniel Knapp is a video producer, inventor, and amateur historian. He holds an MS in environmental science and communications. His business, World Turtle Productions, LLC, has allowed him to travel to many amazing places and work with many amazing people on award-winning communications initiatives in Australia, Papua New Guinea, Japan, New Mexico, and near to home in New England and the Boston area. And he is going to essentially talk about the science and history of glass as it relates to the Israelites and the Jews. So I'm going to go ahead and spotlight you. And just let me know when you'd like me to start the video.
Okay. So thank you very much for having me. My name is Dan, and I'm friends with Sonya, and I'm going to give a brief history of glass, so this puts it into context. I just want to show this book. This is one of our reference books. Sonya suggested that we all look at this book, and I've got a lot of the history from this book. So this is called The Glassmakers, an Odyssey of the Jews. And I have a video of a glass blower that we're going to show. But before we start that, I just want to make it really clear that glass was invented really only one time in all of history. So we understand that ceramics pops up everywhere around the world where there's clay and there's fire. You can make ceramics. But glass only happened one time. You need very special resources, very special materials, and a whole bunch of knowledge that makes it very specific to one moment in history. And that really happened in what we know of as the cradle of civilization in ancient Sumer. About 4,000 years ago is when the process started. And then it kept a secret within these guilds and enclaves of glass makers. And those secrets were kept very tight to the guild. So it wasn't something that was then taught to the world. It was taught only to individual artisans that kept the secrets. And those artisans became the Israelites and eventually the Jews. So glass and the history of glass and glass making is a Israelite and Jewish invention that then spread to the world. So I want to really make that clear that that's, you know, a lot of people give credit to the Egyptians. People say the Egyptians were the ones that invented glass. That's not true. The Egyptians had the manufacturing capability that they imported from Israel, and then those artisans created the glass that made Egypt famous, but that was all imported. So Leah, if you can start that video of the glass blower. So this is just raw footage of a glass studio in New Mexico. This is not Sonya's work. This is I want you all to be aware, okay, the artist here is dipping glass. He's getting glass called the gather from one kiln where he starts the process. Now, this is a modern day forge. This is something that we see now. 4,000 years ago, this wasn't how it happened, but the principles are still the same. So he's taken a quartzite glass, a quartzite crystal, sand, and melted it in that first furnace. Now, you have to be able to know how to, first of all, what kind of sand is going to melt. You have to have the technology of the furnace that can melt it that hot. And now he's put the glass into a second furnace. So it takes two furnaces in order to make this process happen. And it takes a huge amount of energy. You can just imagine how hot those two furnaces are. That takes a tremendous amount of energy. So back in the day, in the land of Canaan, they had a river that had a delta that had the quartzite sand. It was one river that held the quartzite sand, and they had all of the trees of Lebanon, the cedars of Lebanon, basically ended up being deforested because of this the glass invention and the glass process. So they had the knowledge of the furnace, how to heat glass, they had the sand, and they had the fuel. And then in addition to that, they had previous knowledge of how metal can be melted and made into tools, and then advanced ceramics with glazes. So all of those sciences were combined along with chemistry. This is a lot of chemistry here. And then all of those skills combine into a glass making studio. And in the old days, that was the guild. The guild held all of these secrets, and those were all Israelite in function because that's where the resources were that allowed this industry to happen. So just take a moment here and look at how beautiful the glass actually is in the process. It's very labor intensive, and you'll see in a moment there's always someone on hand to help with the process. It can't be just done by yourself. You have to have a team of people that you rely on, that are your apprentices or your students or your co-masters, all working together in a glass studio to produce this work. Now, Lee, if you can just pause for a moment, I would just want to say, so early glass was not like this. This is a more modern invention of when the glass blower is blowing into it, making a bubble. Before this, it was all done with what's called frit and rod. So these were materials, raw material of glass that was made in a factory you had to heat the furnaces up to extremely high temperatures just to make the raw ingredients for glass, which is frit and rod and glass ingots. And then those materials were exported along with the artisan. And then the secondary phase takes a lot less heat just to melt the frit and the rod. So those frit and rod were exported to Egypt and everywhere else in the world at the time. And then they were made into fused glass pieces, like Sonya, you'll see Sonya's work is a fused glass. So Sonya's not glass blowing. She's actually practicing a more older technique of glass. So, okay, Leah, you can hit play again. And what I'd like to go. Does everybody understand what we're talking about here now? This is glass is quartzite sand originally that was melted in a single kiln and then melted in another kiln that's worked in a secondary kiln to make a final product. Now, as I'd like if you can fast forward a little bit, Leah, to if it's possible. There's a shot. Okay, here's our assistant coming in, and you can see she's working now. She's taking from the other furnace the raw glass. You can see it there, and she's gonna apply it. You'll see in a moment. She's taking the gather, it's called. That's the raw glass, and she's gonna apply a small piece of it onto the vessel that the artist is creating. And there's just a moment, and I'm gonna end this part soon. I just want to show you, as you talk about the future of glass and what glass is now. Glass is beautiful, it's artistic, it's expressive, it's it's a usable, functional system for storing your wine or your beer or whatever. But in this moment, you're going to also see the optical quality of glass in its raw form as she pulls this glass off. Let's see if this is it. So I tried to slow the video down. That wasn't the moment, but I think we might have missed the moment when she pulls a string, but that's okay. You get the idea in that moment there, the glass is retaining the heat and therefore retaining the light of that heat. And you can see in this moment the optical quality of the glass. And as we grew as a civilization beyond just the Israelites and how we integrate glass into society, we now use it in an optical form where we are, pulling these threads of glass very thin and then pushing light and data through, and that creates what we now think of as a fiber optics network, which is basically our entire planet is encased in this very fine spider web of glass fibers that pass all of our data, even probably what we're seeing all of us on Zoom right now. We can probably give thanks to the science of optical glass. So that's basically what I wanted to present in terms of how the history of glass and the science of glass all interconnected with the Israelite and later the Jewish way of thinking and problem solving, and that's basically what I had to start.
Yeah, and even though you couldn't see it, the way it looks is it's almost like pulling apart a piece of taffy. That moment you're talking about when they attach the glass to it, pulling a piece of taffy that looks like it's almost on fire and it's bright and it's glowing. And you were trying to mention that that's what a lot of modern technology uses, was these fiber cable or the optical cables. Is that what you called it?
Yeah.
Or yeah, it is very cool. And I just want to clarify, he had the tube in his mouth. So essentially throughout the whole time, he is blowing to expand the glass.
In his case, yeah, he's blowing a bubble inside a molten, hot glass. And that's a bit of a more modern invention. As I said, that was something that happened probably around 200 BCE, if I remember correctly. So from the history of the beginning of glass, it was about 2000 BCE when they first started making the frit and the rod. And then it took, about 800 to 1,000 years, or I can't, maybe not good at math at the moment, but a couple thousand years of innovation and trade secrets that allowed them to figure out how to blow a bubble in a hot glass. So that was a huge innovation. But as I said, Sonya, going back to the very original way of how the Egyptians, the Israelites in Egypt did it, and how the ancient Sumer did it, Sonya's got it right on target.
All right. So thank you so much, Daniel. And you have some exciting projects coming up. Maybe towards the end, you can share a little bit about that. He's an inventor himself. I won't share anything more, that it's his story to tell. But all right, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Sonya.
Well, hello there, everybody. Thank you for coming to this art show. And I just want to share that Sharon, my best friend, she was the one that sent me that book. And she sent it to me as a surprise, not knowing that I had just discovered. My mom was telling me a story about the day that her great-grandmother died. And there were just all these clues that my mom had no clue about that were Jewish practices. Like when she was passing, she made sure that everybody present knew to bury her with her feet facing the east. And they went and got the family priest, which I didn't know we had. That was also a converso tradition, that an oldest son would be a priest to keep an eye out for the converso community, to protect them, and to pretend to be great Catholics. So I asked her, I said, what was his name? And she was like, his name was Father Jose Gabriel Lopez. So here I'm doing all this research, doing some genealogy, etc. And I asked my mom, well, what was your grandmother's maiden name? And she said it was Salcido Robles. Well, it perked my ears because Sharon sent me the book, Samuel Konunsky's book, The Glassmakers, An Odyssey of the Jews, the first 3,000 years. And then my mom is telling me about her grandmother's name, maternal grandmother's name, being Robles. I had just found the Inquisition records of a man named Juan Robles, who was burned at the stake for Judaizing. And he had fled to Morocco. He was a glassblower. And as Daniel was mentioning earlier, that the glassblowers were a very tight-knit group. The Inquisition followed Jews based on their professions, based on their customs, their dress, and their foods. So his mother had converted to Catholicism and begged him to come back to Spain, which of course it was heresy to do so if you were still practicing Judaism after the expulsion. And how I came across those Inquisition records before I found out my great-grandmother's maiden name was Robles, I have no idea. I've often felt like heaven was just dropping little breadcrumbs for me to follow those trails. And that's one of the trails that I often had wondered. I was the only person in my family that I knew of that did glass and was so passionate about it. My first teacher didn't even teach me because she thought I knew what I was doing. And I kept saying to her, what am I doing wrong? She was like, oh, you don't know? And I was like, no, that's why I'm taking this class. And within a month, I was teaching her how to make parlor scopes, because I started making kaleidoscopes almost immediately, which are they're very scientific products. They were not toys. Sir David Brewster studied the polarization of light. And he was one that basically, because he used mirrors to refract light, that's how the kaleidoscope came about. It wasn't until the early 1900s that the toy makers from Europe brought them to the Americas. So I was making kaleidoscopes like a month into me learning how to do glass. So it came very naturally to me. I didn't know why, but it's just been a passion of mine. Out of all the arts that I've done, glass has been what I've done the longest, loved the most, and continue to be inspired to make. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey to discover these little tidbits along the way. So
real quick, so part of your path, and I want to sort of point to the beautiful display behind you, which is all your work. So for some time you owned a Judaica store and you had an art studio. Do you mind just sharing a little bit about that?
So I started out when I went through my divorce in 1996. I came back to New Mexico from Texas, And interestingly, my dad said, hey, Mija, I'll pay your bills for a month if you decide, just take a month off and decide what you want to do. If you want to go back to school, if you know, whatever you want to do, Mom and I'll support you for a month. And I was like, Dad, I don't need a month to decide what I want to do. I want to do my art full time. And so I left Texas in August, and December 15th of 1999, I opened my little glass studio and gallery in 350 square feet. That's when I met Sharon, was in 1999, a few years later, because she was a glass collector. And by then in 1999, I was selling Judaica, and she walked in and with her husband and went and took him to court because he was an attorney, came back, told him she was going to buy glass, and ended up walking out with Judaica. And we've been on this path together ever since.
I just want to share this real quick. This is your store, right?
Yes. It was, the gallery, of course, was on the right side, and the Judaica shop was on the left side. And there was a 1,000 square foot addition to that building where the Judaica shop was. So I had the doors, double doors, that I could close off when I was working in my studio and there wasn't events going on. It was a talk about multitasking. I'd have events on Shabbatons for the weekend, and I'd be in my studio and gallery working the shop with the doors closed and running back and forth. So it was always a lot of fun. I had a lot more energy back then than I do now. But a lot of people were there. Faye was there, Sharon was there, Dan was there. A lot of people transitioned. I had teachers from all over, people from Israel, people from all over the States, rabbis from different backgrounds of Judaism, from Hasidic rabbis to Reform rabbis, coming to teach Shabbatons and helping people to transition back into Judaism. So it was quite a journey for several years.
Great. Well, why don't we now transition into you showing some of your jewelry, which sharing about your work. So it's dichroic glass jewelry, and some are tiles specifically, but dichroic means two color, which Sonya shared with me. Can you share a little bit about the science behind it?
Sure.
NASA and.
Yeah, this was a NASA developed product. It was for NASA, they use 40 layers of vacuum compressed mineral salt.
This is dichroic glass behind me, correct?
Yes, that's a fused tile that I did. It was my burning bush, my Shema, and had a lot of feedback from various scholars as to how to do it, make sure that, it does have the sacred names. So you'll see some of the pieces I'll share with you about what happened to them in the kiln when they blow up. But dichroic di means two and chroic means color. So it refracts. The reason they use it for NASA was for the tiles. So they have a high intensity heat glass for the tiles. The tiles are made out of glass. The helmets of the astronaut, the shields, are made out of glass. And when you see that gold color, you're actually seeing gold. They use like gold, sapphire, I believe. I'm
going to go ahead and start sharing as you're speaking.
Sure. And so they take 4 minerals and they vacuum compress it to 3 layers. And you can't even see it. It's so thin with a metal screen. So for art glass, because it's sold by the square inch, it's very expensive. Art glass has 20 layers of dichroic coating. The earrings that I have on actually have 30 layers. It's called float glass, and you can see how thin it is. And it's very lightweight. You don't hardly even feel it when it's on. This is one of the sets that a Shema tile blew up. And when I opened, I heard it blow. And when I opened the kiln 8 hours later, I was like, oh no, what am I going to do with all these like blown up pieces? And so I refired it, and begin to get pieces of jewelry. So you can actually see some of the hidden, like the sheen. I had the tile, the sheet of glass, I had 4 layers on that particular piece. So it was the base purple glass, and then it was the clear dichroic glass that we actually used a laser to etch off the coating, which just was painful to watch because that's what you're paying for. But to get the flames and to get the lettering, we did something called vector art on the computer, which translated it to the
Leah, pause it now. So pause the video here. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
so it actually translates from the computer into the laser machine, and it lasers off the coating to the design. And so I always, it was always holding my breath because it cost so much money for the glass. Then it cost so much money for the lasering. And then I had to travel. I'd go to Roswell, actually. There was a gentleman there that had a laser machine, and he was the only one that wouldn't blow up my glass in the laser. And then I go and fuse several layers, one at a time to make sure that all the glass was annealing properly. So yeah, they're all one of a kind. And that's how this bracelet and pendant came about, was
Okay, click play again.
the sacred names. So there it is in reformed, redone, refused glass.
And how much typically does glass cost? I'm just
The dichroic glass, it can range depending on the patterns and the minerals that they use. If they're using copper and silver versus gold and sapphire and rubies, it's a different price. This piece is I very rarely do more than one piece. If I do a series, I might do 6 to 12 pieces, but I'll do them different. I'll use different glass. This is a mold actually of the tree of life. And I was just, really passionate about, Etz Chaim, the Torah, how it relates to us on so many different levels, from creativity to, scholarly thinking and questioning and, enlightenment. And so these pieces are basically one of a kind. I think I only did 6 of the tree of life, and I only have 2 left. And this one's one of the pieces. So
what's the mineral in here?
you'll see a lot of the sapphire because you see the blue. If you turn different angles, actually I have that piece right here. You can, if I turn it at different angles, you'll see gold. So you'll see that there's gold in there.
Are you holding the piece up real quick? Should I show you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, there you go. Oh, beautiful.
How you can see that it's gold and then it's pink. So when you're seeing gold, it's actually gold. And when you're seeing the pink, you're seeing the sapphire or the ruby. So if you see gold or blue, you're seeing the sapphire. And there's typically 4 minerals fused, they're vacuum compressed on the glass. So at different heats, and if I did this with clear glass, you would see this. So see how it looks a little bit shinier versus this is more of a matte finish.
Great.
What
So,
does something like that cost?
huh?
What does something like that cost?
Leah, I think this set is listed for 100.
Yeah, I'll put the listing on the site and you can see it from there. But I'll do that in a moment. But Daniel, you're my director. Do I show the video now?
Well, actually, this is a tile that Sonya, I have of Sonya's tile, one of Sonya's pieces. You can see, I think the video, we were trying to explain that there's something going on called refraction. And as you layer stuff on there, what she's done is she's cut out the pattern using lasers and then applied the dichroic glass on a pile of glass and then heated it in the kiln. And you can just see that the nature of the chemical and the chemical reaction allows the light to travel through the glass in a different way depending on how the light is hitting it and how it's traveling through. And in this case, some of it's getting blocked by the metallic print, you might say.
Gorgeous.
But yeah, you can now, I think if you want to show more of that, the video.
Okay, let me spotlight. And also, if you want to start putting questions in the chat box, we will have time for that in just a bit. So, I'm just gonna fast forward a little bit since we have talked about this one, just so we move
This is
on.
almost done. Here we go. Yeah, this one is the next one.
Yeah, so this piece, again, was one of those tiles that blew up. And I always would just kind of try to be patient. And I'd get to the point where if something blew up in the kiln, I just say, okay, what do you want to be? And so I'd refire things. And this one just happened to fire just like that. And it looked like a dance, like a dancing maiden with her skirt up in the air. And I call these my twofers because I do them with the back. There's no silver on the back, so light can shine through, but you can also wear it both sides. So the sun represents my New Mexico side, and then the Hamza represents my Jewishness. And I have a real love affair with Hamzas for some reason. So yeah, that piece was dancing in the sun. It just, the glass is amazing. By the way, that piece is sold, so not available now.
Oops, what happened to this? Sorry about that. Do you mind, and you actually ended up selling that piece, so.
It's sold and it got shipped today. So Corey, congratulations, your art piece is on its way. So yeah, a lot of times, depending on how you fire the glass, I've had up to 5 layers. This piece behind me, this big Shema piece, has about 5 layers of glass. So it's a lot of intense heat. You know, you're firing for maybe 8 to 10 hours very slowly, and then you're annealing for twice as long, just to make sure that the glass comes down at the right temperatures and slowly.
I'm going to move to this piece. Now you're shifting into the ring.
So I have that ring right here. This one is, I don't know if you can see that, but you can see the hidden Hamza at different angles of light. This one just really has a lot of copper and diamond in it. I've got 2 layers of dichroic on it. So it's really, in the sunlight, you don't see the Hamza. When it's darker, you do. So it's just a really cool technique in how to do the glass. There's so many different ways you can do it. It just takes some creativity. But the tile, let me go back to the tile that Daniel showed you. So the red glass actually starts out as blue. It's got gold in it. And it has to be fired at a minimum of 1800 degrees for it chemically to change to gold, to the red, for the gold to turn from blue to red. And when I did the 2 layers of glass, I actually have an extra layer around that edge that's dichroic rods. They're maybe a 1/4 inch thick. And I would have to very carefully cut them to make them fit around the tile before I fired it. But you can see that the glass is actually red, but it's got so much gold in it that gold turns red when it's fired. So that was just a real interesting learning curve too, to get the glass hot enough to transition from blue to red.
And I just point out that that is, you know, ancient knowledge of chemistry. You know, this, if you're producing red glass frit or red glass rod or blue glass 4,000 years ago, you had to understand what chemical compounds were going to react together under heat and pressure in order to create a final color. That's not like an easy task for anybody, right? But that took very specific knowledge of and ability to apply the knowledge about minerals and physics.
Okay. So just in looking at the time, I just want to show that one more piece in the video. I don't think we'll see the whole video, but the pendant, and then we're going to open it up for questions. So just real quick, if you'll just explain this piece.
So this piece is called Shining Star, and I made two pieces. I wish you had time to show the other one with the hidden Hamza too. You know, although our people have been, you can say, fractured, we've been separated, we still can bring our beauty to the world as Jews. And I can't even imagine when our people become a unified people as a whole, how beautiful we're going to shine to the world. And that particular piece is, I made it right after Rabbi Chaim Richman had come to New Mexico. Actually, he was in Roswell, and Sharon had the blessed opportunity to host not only him and his wife, but to have the breastplate of the priest in her home. And I told her that was such a blessing, because he brought the vestments of the Temple Institute to tour the United States, and we were very fortunate to have seen those. So that piece was inspired by, literally, I had my hands right over the breastplate of the priesthood, and I could feel the energy of all the stones that are now present on that breastplate. And now it sits in the museum in Jerusalem. So that
I'm going to just, this is what you were talking about, right? That you wanted to show?
So when we were doing the Fractured Faith Museum exhibit, this piece came from that inspiration. Again, it's a two-sided piece. So even though we've been fractured, even though we've been broken, we're still connected. And so even though we all look different, talk different, some people eat gefilte fish, some people don't. Some people have pita for Shabbat, some people have challah for Shabbat. We're still connected. And so even though we have maybe many times in our life felt alone, felt like we didn't belong, I always felt like God's hand and his eye was on us, and that he never lost us, even though we were lost to our own identity as Jews. Those of us that come from crypto-Jewish backgrounds, we were never really lost. And so we've always had a hand watching, guiding us, as my journey has guided me along the way. So.
Well, thank you, Daniel, for putting that video together and for those beautiful words, Sonya. You're absolutely right. This has been a wonderful presentation. The two of you have put so much time and love into this, and it's been such an honor and pleasure to work with the two of you.